morning, everybody. By now, you're on to the second week of our 6-week class, and hopefully, you've all finished your research papers. Those are due tomorrow, if you haven't, by 10 p.m. And again, those papers deal with the Virgin Mary, and you're researching either a doctrine about Mary, an apparition, that would be a time where Mary appeared to people, or some of the devotions that we have to the Virgin Mary. And the details of that were talked about in a video for last week, and there's also a separate kind of tab on Canvas for you to read and see more about the details for that. It wouldn't hurt for you to start thinking about the next paper. This is due on July 11th, and it's an easy paper to write. It's a short paper, 2 to 3 pages, but first you have to watch a movie. And there's a list of movies in the syllabus, and I think all of those movies are owned by the College of St. Mary's Library. So if you don't have access to them yourselves, which most of you don't, you could check them out from the library. And what I ask is possibly if you can just watch it there in the library and then return it so that your classmates have easy access to it as well. There is one movie called Dead Man Walking that I think, last time I looked anyway, was on Netflix. So this week, you're reading the rest of Bonnie Thurston's book, and this is chapter 5, 6, and 7. In chapter 5, it talks about the works that were written by Luke, or someone who claims to be Luke. Or at least they say that the information is what they heard from Luke. Okay, so a little bit about Luke. He was not one of the original apostles. Luke is someone who traveled with St. Paul on a missionary journey. And so everything that Luke knows about Jesus is from St. Paul. And that's not to say he wouldn't have known other people who were associates of Jesus, but as far as the apostles go, he was not one, and he didn't personally know them. Luke is also the only Gentile author in the New Testament, which is significant because he reaches out to Gentile people who are converting at the time. Also, we believe that the person who wrote the Gospel according to Luke and the person who wrote Acts of the Apostles are the same person. The best evidence of this is if you look at the beginning of both those books, the Gospel and Acts, you'll find that in the Gospel of Luke, it starts off saying, here is an account about Jesus, your most excellent Theophilus. And then in Acts of the Apostles, it begins saying, in my first book, I talked about Jesus, but in this second book, Theophilus, I'm going to talk about the apostles. So Theophilus could have been a specific person whose name was actually Theophilus. It could have been a specific person whose code name was Theophilus. The word Theophilus would mean God lover. Or it could just be, hey, all you God lovers, here's what I want to tell you first about Jesus and then about the apostles. And so the Gospel according to Luke is kind of like the first Twilight movie, and Acts of the Apostles is like the second Twilight movie. It's like a sequel. Or like Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone and Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets or something like that. And sometimes the Gospel of Luke is referred to as the Gospel of Women because it does highlight women. The book will kind of question whether this is good or bad, whether Paul is sexist or not, and you're going to react to that yourselves. When we get to Acts of the Apostles, though, it's kind of clear that they're kind of minimizing the role of women a little bit here. And this might be just to fall in line with society and to be more accepted as a religion, and so not to call so much attention to themselves by being countercultural. But in the section about the Gospel of Luke, you'll hear about a lot of the women that Luke highlights. And the section about Acts of the Apostles, you'll read about some specific roles that women had, and in some cases leadership roles, which is very important to us as we think about the role women should have today. Also, some of the passages in chapter 6, these are the deuterocanonical books, meaning that probably written later, probably not actually written by St. Paul, and just given credit to Paul so that it would give credibility to these writings. Some of these passages say things like women shouldn't talk in church and women have to have their head covered in church, and some of the more sexist kind of passages that we might today take issue with. And some of the more fundamentalist churches take very literally. And again, this is where the question of whether it's prescriptive or descriptive comes into play. Some of those more fundamentalist Christian groups who still think that the husband is the head of the household, they would read it to be prescriptively, saying that this is how things should always be. Those of us who believe women should have an important role in the church today and that those things don't necessarily still apply, we would read that to be descriptive. This is how things were then, not necessarily how they need to be today. I also do not have a PowerPoint for chapter 7. It's a pretty short chapter, so just take your own notes on that. From taking the first quiz, you know that the quizzes will have 20 questions. You have about 45 minutes, and you should read over your notes first. I try to put as sort of the title of the question where to find this in your notes or the book, so make sure you pay attention to the title of the question so that you know kind of where to look for the answer. If you have any questions, please let me know, and have a great week.